to be there and can't be away for more than 12 months over 5 years. I appreciate the intent of that. My question is to enforceability. Who would enforce that? How would that be, how would we do that? And I think my real question is this practical to enforce that provision, which I agree is a very important one.
Mr. Simmons, you have an answer to enforcement and practicability of enforcement. Who would be charged with that?
In the event that the owner-occupant has ceased to be a true owner-occupant, they've been away from the property for a greater period of time than the sabbatical provision that's allowed here, that could be enforced through complaint by someone with knowledge that person's no longer living there.
So a neighbor or anyone else who knows.
Correct.
So if they make that complaint, what does that process look like?
And who, to complaint to who?
Yeah, thank you.
The complaint would go to the zoning enforcement officer, and at that point, unless the person were to move back in and reestablish owner occupancy, the special permit would lapse, and they would be in violation of the special permit.
Okay, thank you. And finally, Mr. Moderator, the point has been raised by opponents that that this could result in McMansions and unwanted expansion that I doubt few people in the room, including myself, want to see wholesale. And if it pleases the moderator, through the moderator, to sort of refresh my memory on some of the specific, if there are specific safeguards built into this that really make that difficult or more difficult for developers to take wholesale advantage of this, as has been described.
Mr. Fitzsimmons, if you could respond.
Yes. Well, you're still going to have the requirements that we currently have for R0 and R1 districts. So you're still going to have the open space requirement, the setback requirements, and so on. And yes, you could build to the envelope. But you could do that now, whether you have accessory apartments or not. You could take your single-family house and max it out as far as the envelope would allow. But those are the constraints on expanding the property.
And the same thing, you could knock your house down now and build something big if you wanted to. So demolition could happen now, and you could have an illegal accessory apartment or one that the kitchen isn't just going to, So I guess my question is, if this potential kind of exists now for large houses to be built within existing requirements, or someone to add an illegal accessory apartment or one that just skirts by with a disconnected stove, that's happened now, could be happening now, and this wouldn't make this any worse in your view?
I think the McMansion argument is a little bit beside the point. And I think we're in agreement on this, actually, that if you have the right under current zoning to have a bigger house, you can apply for a building permit, and in the event that that's denied, you can appeal that to the Zoning Board of Appeals, and there's a provision for allowing larger homes. So yes, you could do that now, and I think that doesn't change if this accessory apartment article were to be approved.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Fitzsimmons. Mr. Romano.
Thank you. Maria Romano, Precinct 7. Guess some of you might call me a fool. I am a contractor, and I think that this is not a good article. I would vote against it for many reasons. For 32 years, I've been a residential builder, and I hold myself to a very high standard. I do not build just to build. I don't change the architectural landscape of a neighborhood, overcrowd it with structures, people, and whatnot. The article changes simply one-family houses to two-family houses. It has always been my goal to have an addition to a house look like it's always been there. Not that we just stuck a structure on the side of a house. And I have discussed this with many of my clients and said, let's look at this again. I will not do this. It affects your house, it affects the neighborhood, and it affects the architectural landscape of what we want to hold true to Arlington. I have two questions. Maybe one of the representatives can answer. you need two means of egress. And if the structure cannot be built on the first level because it does not meet the setback requirements, and it's built on the second level, say over a family room, the second means of egress is going to be, in some cases, unsightly, just because it has to be safe. Has that been addressed at all?
Mr. Fitzsimmons?
The answer to your question is that that second means of egress has to be contained within the existing structure, and there is a small carve-out in the Warren article that would allow a build-out of that second means of egress. So I think that would be a matter that would probably be before the Zoning Board of Appeals in terms of how that would look like.
All right, so that would be separate. That structure would be separate from the 700 square feet of living space.
I think that would be included within the 700 square feet of living space.
Because that does take a chunk out of the living space.
It does take a chunk out of it, you're
Which
correct.
leads me to my other question. It can only be a one-bedroom apartment because there's just not enough room legally to have a two-bedroom apartment in that 700 square feet of space. Is that not correct? And is that a requirement that it remains a one-bedroom accessory unit?
We have not tried to define what the interior living space in the accessory apartment would be. It could be a studio. It could be...
Yeah, no, a studio or a one-bedroom, but I don't think it can go beyond that. My other question tying into that was, if I heard you correctly, you said that the owner can live in either unit. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Right, which leads me to a serious concern. If the owner now lives in the 700 square foot unit, then the big house can be rented to many people. And how do we govern that? How do we control that? I do not want, because of expenses of the senior citizen or the person who can't maintain that house by himself or herself, is now going to live in the one bedroom and rent out the bigger unit. And that does increase problems with schools and density and water usage and the whole 9 yards that comes with that. Because that means a lot more people can live in that existing structure. So I have many concerns that I think need to be addressed, and there are too many loopholes just based on Mr. Warden's amendment itself. It's becoming very convoluted, and I think we need more clarity here before we make an honest decision on this, and I'm voting no on this. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Fitzsimmons. Mr. Phillips, Walter?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Walter Phillips, Precinct 21. To me, this article is basically just a way to circumvent the procedure that we normally have for rezoning property. If you want to rezone a property, you submit a warrant article to this meeting. We discuss it, and it requires a 2/3 vote. If this amendment is passed, we'll have no say in this. There's not even a mention that neighbors need to be abutted. Abutting neighbors need to be notified. It's just if your neighbor wants to change their home from R1 to R2, they can do it with the very minimal restrictions included in this amendment. And as people have said, we have R0 and R1 neighborhoods because people want to live there, people have purchased property and own property whose value is dependent on the character of the neighborhood being R1 and R0. Now we're telling the people who live there, maybe you own that property and expect it to be R1, but now we're going to change part of it to R2, which is a very good example of what we have heard many, many times over many years as described as spot zoning. And the redevelopment board, to my knowledge, up to now, has never condoned spot zoning. But this amounts, in essence, this amounts to spot zoning. It's just taking a property in a particular zone and changing the zoning. In this case, changing it from R0 or R1 to R2. So I appreciate the amendments that have been offered by Mr. Warden and Ms. Warden, but even with those amendments, I would, which I support, of course, I would certainly vote against this amendment, and I hope that you will too.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Klein?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Klein, Precinct 10. I stand in favor of the article, but in opposition to the proposed amendments. I find the amendments somewhat short-sighted in some of the implications that they provide and do not, in the end, seek to accomplish what the goals of the original article are. If we say that these units can only be used by those who are over 65 or disabled, we are saying to people who are young, struggling families that you can keep struggling. We're saying to people who have young family who are looking to have a nanny live on site that you can't do that either. And I don't think that's fair, and I don't think that's appropriate. It also creates a situation where if you have a couple where one is 65 and one is 64, and the 65-year-old unfortunately passes away, the remaining person has to tear out their accessory apartment until they turn 65, at which point they can build it back, which again seems rather strange. The suggestion was made that if you have a single family and you're elderly and on a fixed income and you want to have a tenant, then you maybe should buy a two-family house. Typical difference in price in Arlington is about $140,000 to $170,000, which is difficult to spring. I live in a two-family house. I'm lucky enough to have one that is a two-family house still. I have a tenant. Most two-family houses in my neighborhood are condos. They're not two-family houses. They're two single houses. They just happen to be abutting. This drastically changes the character of Arlington and who can afford to live here. When a two-family house is a $500,000 investment, but a condo, if you buy the two-family and you condo it, you can sell it for $700,000 or $800,000. An accessory apartment is an attempt to come up with a way that we can create a smaller unit that helps to serve the needs of the people who are living in the house. The statement was made, there's a lot of concern apparently about having more people in Arlington, having more children in Arlington. From everyone I know who's lived here a long period of time, there used to be far more children in Arlington. Staggeringly larger numbers than used to be here. If you look at the numbers of schools we've closed over the years, I'm not sure why all of a sudden children are the detriment of the town. I have two of my own. They are my own personal detriment, but that's beside the point. So on the age perspective, I'm concerned about that. I'm also concerned about limiting these accessory apartments to being accessible, being an affordable priced unit. I appreciate the problems we have in town with affordability. I have numbers of friends who have said, you know, I will buy a house in Arlington next year when the prices are lower, and they've been saying this now for a decade. We desperately need affordable housing in town. I don't think forcing the accessory apartments to be affordable is a worthwhile endeavor because we're essentially telling someone you can have this apartment because we know you're in trouble and you need the financial resources, but we're going to limit the financial resources you can get from this. I just don't think that's an appropriate way to go. This is not going to create a town of two-family houses. Lexington has accessory apartments. They've had them since 1982 or 1983. In 22 years, do you know how many accessory apartments they've added? They've added 60. 60 in the entire town of Lexington. And that's a town that doesn't have a big base already of two-family houses. I don't foresee this as being something where we're looking to turn every single house into a gold mine because we're going to add a little extra apartment into it. It's very small. Another point that was raised was the McMansion effect, that if we allow this, people are going to be building larger properties. This law does not apply to you if you build outside of what's allowed on your property. If you have I would ask for clarification on this, but my understanding is if you have an existing non-conforming house, which is that your house does not currently work within the zoning of the town, that you are not allowed to have an accessory apartment. Is that correct? That is correct. So if you want to build a house that's bigger than the law allows, you are not allowed to have an accessory apartment. If you build a house that is as large as your lot allows, you can do that today, and it has nothing to do with the accessory apartment law. If you are unhappy with the size of houses going up around you, this is not the cause of it, and this is not the solution for it. It has to do with other parts of the zoning code. We had a beautiful house in our neighborhood that had 18,000 square foot lot. It was an amazing property. It's 3 big houses now. Could we do anything about it? No, because that's what zoning allows in this town. But accessory apartments have nothing to do with that. So what I'd like to get back to is I think that this is an opportunity to create some space for some people who are in a situation where they need the kind of availability they would have for an accessory apartment. Accessory apartments are not designed to supersede the owners. If there's a new owner for the property, they are required to basically reestablish the special permit. They have to go through back to the town. They have to get, I see shaking heads, I know that's not correct. They do have to sign an affidavit with the town saying that they are having this accessory, that they understand the rules of having an accessory apartment. If they fail to do that, they are, basically they're violating a court document. So, that's at their own risk. So I encourage you to please vote down these amendments. I don't think they do what they're supposed to do, and I do ask you to support the original warrant article. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Radosha?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Bob Radosha, Precinct 11. For those that are interested or care, the Bruins went the other way. They're going to be playing golf from here on. It's 2-1, I believe. Correct? Overtime. Anyhow, back in December, town meeting members received an online survey for our opinions on accessory apartments. My first reaction was to ask, now who's pushing for this? Where is this coming from? And why would the ARB need to survey town meeting members? I became suspicious when I did not receive a survey for any other articles. And this seemed more like a 2020 survey question. And as a result, after attending ARB meetings, hearings, and making comments and studying this on my own, I remain suspicious. I just don't understand what's really going on. Something else seems to be happening here, and I'm not convinced that this is in the best interest of the town. What's missing from the article that you have before you are the reasons that were given for bringing this up. And one of them was to increase the diversity of housing options. Just how diverse do we need to be? We are thought of as a town with a very diverse housing options, which includes senior housing, low-income housing, condos, apartment buildings, two-families, small, medium, and larger single-family homes. The only thing we are missing is a mobile home park, which could be an option if the Sim site developer walks away. All right? Then we had, this was to encourage better utilization of existing housing stock. We are already one of the densest towns in the state. And with the exception of the city of Cambridge, we have a higher density than any of the towns listed on the last page of the handout that was sent to us. We're comparing ourselves with towns. We're 8,200 people per square foot. This per square mile. Okay, I'll get it straight. Cemetery, that's right. The cemetery thing is, there were about 2 square feet, those little things. Anyhow, but you know, when we're 8,200 per square mile. Comparing ourselves to Lincoln, which is 602, Concord is 700 and something, Lexington is quite almost 1,900 per. So, you know, we're 4 times Lexington. We keep saying, well, they did it in Lexington, they do it in these other places. They're not like us. All right, then the closest one we have is Watertown. And then after that, it's 4,700 in Waltham and 40-something in Newton. So we're not in the same category as the people that are on this list. They have more options in terms of expansion and so forth. All right. Now, one of the other reasons was to, well, and by the way, in terms of the density, the last time I checked with the Treasurer's office, we have more vehicles registered in Arlington than we have people. And this is only going to lead to more vehicles, or at least one-on-one. So I don't think we need any more, as you all know. Now, one of the other reasons was to protect the safety of residents and the stability, property values, and character of residential neighborhoods. I don't see how that can happen. I think maybe it should have said undermine the safety of residents and utility and property values and character of residential neighborhoods. I don't see where it does anything to help it out. Then we have, most requests came from residents owning larger homes. There's a good chance that if they are in a larger home, they may already have a maid, caretaker, or a nanny headquarters somewhere in the house, and a Jack and Jill stairway to the upper level to bring them down. And all we need to do is just reactivate those houses to what they were originally. There's room to do it. And then we have some residents requesting this with like the option of renting for additional